Hi everyone, hello and welcome to our panel discussion this morning on rebuilding social connection and maintaining psychological safety in an ever-changing work environment. The pandemic has changed our way of working, our social well-being and mental health. Now we need to adapt once more again to a new way of working, and we will explore some helpful strategies here today to navigate this change and look at ways of taking care of yourself in the process. My name is Pamela Lennon. I'm a wellbeing consultant with Zevo Health. And joining me today is Dr. Mike Oliver, who is a health psychologist and specialises in health and workplace health and wellbeing. And following a very different career in the corporate sector, decided to retrain as a psychologist and is passionate about helping people to be happier and healthier in the workplace. And also we have Gleeson, who is a humanistic and integrative psychotherapist and psychological well-being practitioner for Zevo Health as well. So thank you for joining our discussion today.
Absolutely delighted to be here.
Thank you. And for our viewers this morning, we'll be taking questions at the end of the session, but we'll also be using the chat box feature as well. But for now, if you'd like to tell us maybe which company you're from and whether you're working maybe hybrid or back to the office or continuing to work from home, so that'd be great if you could let us know. So thanks for joining us this morning. Mike, we've seen a shift in priority for well-being after the pandemic. How can we effectively embed well-being in the workplace?
Right, so thank you very much, Pamela, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to be spending this time with you. I think leadership has a big part to play here, and when I'm talking about leadership, I'm not just talking about perhaps the top team in your organisation. I think we ought to think about leadership at every level, from, as I say, from the top team all the way through to managers, supervisors and team leaders. So that's kind of the context of leadership, and I think we need to tackle the myth, which is sometimes that it's an either or choice. You know, if we focus on health and well-being, something else has got to give, but I don't believe that at all. I think it's a yes and decision. I think we get business benefits as well as human benefits. So I genuinely think it's the human thing to do, to care for those who are important for us, and I'd like to think that our colleagues are important to us, but there is a business case underpinning all this. Only last week there was a report out from the London School of Economics and Political Science in tandem with the Mental Health Foundation, and it was across the whole of Europe, and they examined lots of different workplace wellbeing initiatives and found the return on investment. So for every euro spent on a workplace wellbeing initiative, at least another euro is generated, up to 16 euro for every euro spent. So there's just a really strong business case for it. And what they found, that the greatest returns actually came on those programs that were aimed at improving the knowledge of mental health for line managers and all staff. So kind of there's a compelling business case to this as well. So what can we do, whether we're a really senior leader or a junior leader? And I'm going to summarize it with 4 C's. So I've got the first C here of control. As humans, typically we like to feel like we're in control. So in a work setting, what can you as a leader, or what can our leaders influence? So this is about giving people a say in the way that they do work. We like to feel like we've got a say in something. Also, where you can, give people a sense of control over the pace at which they do work. You can imagine being told how to do something and how quickly. It's kind of really diminishing for you. So it's where you can give people control over the pace. Most people, all your colleagues will have skills and initiatives, so encourage them to use their skills and initiative, particularly to develop new and interesting things. So if they feel like they've developed something new, that they've got control over it, they'll have much more ownership over it. So another thing when it comes to control, and I'll come back to this later when I talk about breaks, give people a sense of control over when they can take a break. That's really important. Again, just imagine if somebody keeps micromanaging you, telling you what to do, how to do it, when not to do it. So give people a sense of control. The next C, I think, is capacity. So this is one of the big ones. This is about workload. So as a leader, again, at whatever level, how often are you having conversations with your team about workload? Is it reasonable? Does it fit with their work patterns? And is their work environment conducive to achieving that workload? So you'll all probably have experienced this at some point. You may well be achieving it now. Just having conversations about workload and prioritizing it. Prioritize people's workloads. Sometimes, not always, people are afraid to speak up. So have regular and ongoing conversations about capacity. And I would say as well, particularly for new joiners to the workplace, I think it sets a really good culture to have those conversations in one-to-ones. How are you for workload? Because if you train people from day one to expect to be working over and above the normal expectations, you set a tone, and they'll be the future leaders, and they'll start giving more work to the people when they become team leaders. So it's a virtuous circle if you have those conversations. The other C, I think we can influence as a leader, is capability. So basically, this is about giving people the knowledge to do their job. I would say generally, not many of us like feeling exposed or vulnerable in front of our peers or colleagues. That's a very stressful thing. And to be honest, it's pretty much the same outside of work, isn't it? None of us really like feeling stupid in front of our family or our friends. So feeling inadequate in front of our peers is really damaging to people's self-esteem. It's quite anxiety inducing. So try and ensure that people's capabilities are being matched to what they're being asked to do. So this was something that's been a big realization for me over the last few years, having spent a completely different career in the corporate sector. You've probably all been on every single course there is around time management, prioritization and planning, comm skills, listening, and you just go to them, and they're important and they help you do your job. What I just really come to realize over the last few years is, although they are never badged as well-being courses, I think they contribute to well-being, because if you know how to do your job, you take away one of the potential stressors. So investing in the how we can do our job can be as valuable for our well-being as actually some kind of intervention that's directly associated with well-being. So that takes us to the final C, which is compassion. So compassion, what do we mean by that? Now, I think I'm going to use the word selfish here for a moment. As a leader, again, at what level, I think you should be a bit selfish and look after yourself first. You know, when you go on an airplane, they say, you know, put your own oxygen mask on first. And there's a reason for that. If you don't do that, you're not there to help anyone else. And there's another similar expression, which is you can't pour from an empty cup, which I quite like as well. So that's the principle underpinning this. So look after yourself. But I think there's a subtle difference if you're in a position of a manager or as a supervisor, a team leader, is kind of, you are a role model, whether you like it or not. People look up to you. So just kind of let people know that it's okay to look after yourself. Let people know what you're doing. Let them know how you're looking after yourself, whether it's physical activity, things for your mental well-being, taking breaks, taking leave. Just subtly let people know. Don't show off. You know, if you happen to be a long distance runner, don't come in and boast about how far you can run and expect your whole team to be long distance runners. It's not about that. It's just saying, I care for myself, and I think I'd like you to care for yourselves. It's okay to do that. So in the workplace, how do you know if you've got a compassionate workplace? That the Harvard Business Review put some nice questions up. So you may ask yourself this about your current team or department. Would you say that people take time to get to know each other? That's quite a nice indicator if they do. Do people feel okay to speak up when they're struggling? And I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that in the session as well. So do people feel okay to speak up? And do people go out of their way to help someone if they see them in difficulty? They're three nice indicators. So There is a little bit of science, there's a little bit of psychology and physiology underpinning compassion. And when we feel compassion for ourselves or for others, it kind of slows our heart rate down, and it boosts kind of the different nerves within us. There's something called the vagus nerve, for those of you who are interested. That's what we can activate when we do yoga or mindfulness, and it slows us down. And obviously, if you're encouraging, it slows our heart rate down, which is good for our health if our heart rates are racing. So there's a science underpinning it, a biology underpinning it, and then there's some evidence to show that people who report being in compassionate workplaces, guess what? They report more positive emotions, are more committed to their jobs, less likely to experience burnout, report greater teamwork and higher job satisfaction. So it sounds like a bit of a wonder drug, doesn't it, this thing called compassion? So just to summarize, I think if whatever level of leadership we're at, we have I guess we've got a duty of care legally as employers, but also I think it just makes human sense. It makes business sense, and I think it's common sense, but it's not always common practice. So,
Yeah.
so there you go. That's me on leadership to get us going.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that it's put together in 4Cs, yet it reflects all the research and findings about, training people to be able to carry out their job. And if they don't, it's quite stressful and anxious as well. And that compassion piece, particularly after the pandemic, people have, suffered so much. So there has to be that genuine leadership there to really, engage people and to have people engaged in the work as well. And it's simple, but yet it's hard to be simple sometimes,
Yeah.
So yeah, very good. And then, this changing work environment is, how can we kind of maintain this psychological safety that we were trying to instill before the pandemic, but now we have people on site, remote, new ways of communicating, and new changes and challenges for people, changing the work environment.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? I'm going to continue in the C theme and take Mike's lead on that, and just first of all focus on change. I mean, what a broad statement to say that there has been so much change over the last 2 and however many months, years, I've lost track at this point, you know yourself. But, to be able to acknowledge the change that has happened for us, all the bigger changes and all the smaller changes as well. And what the thing is, like, is to be able to say, this is difficult, this is tough, I don't have all the answers, nor should I have all the answers, but what I can do is, and actually here's another C word, collaborate. This is just blending. It's lovely, isn't it? But it is something whereby we need to create that shared space to be able to have, like Mike had said, that regular ongoing conversations, to be able to take our kind of lead from other people's lived experience when we're moving through all the different iterations of the pandemic, and then a byproduct of that, all the different iterations of what it means to do our work and do our work well and do it in a way that makes sense to us. So if we are in a situation now where there is hybrid working available and that is mixed into other forms of, let's say, a working structure that's there, transparency is such a huge thing for that. To be able to have that kind of consistent communication and that regular shared space for feedback, and be ready for the feedback that mightn't necessarily be the most positive, but it will be the most productive if it is open and honest. And of course, all of this, it goes towards that kind of core, that foundation of what is psychological safety now. Well, psychological safety in itself is to be able to be vulnerable, to be authentic without fear of consequence. Like Mike said, speaking up when suffering, and feeling able to do this without feeling, oh God, if I say this now, is this going to affect my promotion? Will this affect my bonus? Will this affect my job? So when we think about psychological safety, and we're kind of looking at it through that lens of, okay, things are different now. Everybody's lived experience is different now, and it will have come to a stage whereby people are looking at work differently, but also people's work is not just what, it's not the most formal of terms, but work, if that makes sense, because we never stop working. For those people who are parents and carers and all of that that goes with living that life and all of those mixed in together, maybe that let's say that working day feels different and needs to be different. So maybe those conversations that need to be had are different, because let's say, for an example, if you are working from home for the last couple of years and you are looking after your kids, and maybe you're a carer for an elderly parent, or other things that might be going on. We can't forget about single people, childless people, you know, all of the different iterations of what it means to navigate your life, you know, and to be able to say, okay, well, what does this look like for you and what do you need, you know, and to have that two-way street, let's say, within that, for people to be able to speak up and say, actually, do you know what, I need to look after this person or that person within my family, within my extended family, my community, whatever it is, and this is what work means to me now, you know. So really, to acknowledge that there are going to be anxieties in any kind of change, because change is difficult. We love pattern, we love familiarity, and I mean, there's been so much change over the last couple of years, and it hasn't stopped coming yet. It isn't over. I don't know if you know this, but it's still knocking around the place. But it is something whereby to maintain that psychological safety, we have to be able to allow people to tend to their personal issues, tend to their personal anxieties, depending on what their structure is. And also, when we think about the mix of working structures, we have to allow for people to, let's say, from a managerial perspective, to look at forms of communication and to look at how people engage within those forms of communication. So let's say, for an example, if I'm speaking to you now, Pam, and we're talking and we can see each other, everything is grand, and you can read my body language and you can see me gesticulating all over the place as I have a tendency to do. I don't know what that's about, but for dramatics, of course. But if we are in a situation whereby, let's say, we're emailing each other or we're messaging, there's no tone in that, but we tend to fill the gaps, don't we? So we tend to fill out that tone depending on what our perception of the other person is in general, or what their perception is that day. Also, it's coming from where we're at that day. So maybe we've had a stressful morning and we're at the tail end of that, and that is being projected, let's say. So there has to be acknowledgement of limitations of communication. Also, what we have to do is be mindful of the flow of work and the kind of sequence of the collective, let's say. So if there are groups of people that are working in the office and they are in, let's say, a collective flow state, and they're working through something and it's going great, and they have come to, let's say, accomplishments within that space. Somebody else is working from home and they're not privy to that. Somebody else is in a hybrid situation whereby they're kind of in and out. We have to make that regular space for clarity within that. Another C word, God, this is brilliant. But, you know, we have to have that space where people are saying, right, are we all up to speed? Are there any questions? These questions won't affect you in any way, whether it be in that kind of formal or informal space, let's say. And, you know, it comes back to something around stating the obvious and feeling like, well, it goes without saying. But what I would say is, absolutely say it. Be explicit all the way in your communication, because that is a real asset when we are moving through change and when we're trying to be as inclusive as possible, as we should be. Do you know what I mean? But it is tough.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said about the assumptions people make with non-visual communication and emails. And I think there's been an enormous impact on people with isolation since the pandemic. And this is why you're discussing rebuilding that social connection, because that is that part that all of us need, introverts and extroverts alike. Yet we've been kind of pulled away from that and lost those social skills that we would have had before, and even for the most social of us as well, just kind of regaining you know, coming back to society again as well. I might ask our viewers today if they want to pop in the chat box what they might be finding most challenging for them at the moment, whether it might be, you know, coming back to the commute, maybe it's communication as well, childcare, or, you know, for a lot of people, it's just that, you know, kind of upset to the norm, to the routine. That's the biggest challenge, and it's really about adapting to change. That's the core of the stress behind it. And sometimes it's you can't really change the stressor in a sense, but you can focus on the mindset behind it and go, as you were saying, Anne, about being, you know, forgiving of yourself and accepting, and even admitting to yourself that, oh, this is a bit challenging. It's cognitively taxing as well, and getting into new routines. So yeah, if you want to pop in the chat box there. In the meantime, Mike, you've done some interesting research on when we're talking about, you know, buffering, the effects of these challenges on the physical and psychological benefits of taking breaks, and how can you take those breaks even though you know they're good for you?
Yes, thank you. I've been, I think, really fortunate over my career to have worked for a few large organisations. That was kind of in my corporate career. So I've worked as a permanent employee for a few large organisations, and I've been self-employed as a consultant and trainer in, say, my corporate life, and now in my kind of health and wellbeing psychology life. So I've been really fortunate to see inside lots of different organisations, and that's what I think I enjoy most about my job. I'm quite curious. And I at one point I was struck, and I still am, by the different experiences that people have when it comes to taking breaks. So something just sparked with me, and it's when I was doing my final part of my doctorate. So I did some research into taking breaks. So I've done some of my own research, and I've looked at lots of other people's research as well. And at one particularly large organisation, I did some research, and I found that people who took lunch breaks were statistically much more likely to not suffer from work-related stress. And also, I found there was an association between the length of a lunch break and how people were feeling in terms of stress. So the longer that some people took, the better they felt. So I don't know whether that feels intuitive or common sense, but it's quite nice when you do some research which actually comes up with some positive findings. It's quite a lot of time you'll have a theory and you just, it doesn't come out, you sort of still think you believe it, but this was kind of some nice empirical evidence. So I think taking breaks is a good thing. There you go, that's my start point, and I'm talking about lunch breaks mainly here, but I will touch on very briefly kind of like the short little breaks that we might take during the day. So just what I'd like you to do for everyone on this session, just take a moment and think about your relationship with taking breaks at work. So it could have been yesterday, it could be what you're planning to do today. So what do you do? Do you stop for 20 minutes at lunchtime, perhaps half an hour, anyone? What do you do? Do you go to a different place than your normal desk or workstation? Do you go and eat something away from your desk? Perhaps you go for a walk, read a book. You may be a bit adventurous, do a bit of yoga, or go for a longer walk, or even a run. Do you do it on your own? Do you do it with someone? Or am I talking a bizarre language here? Perhaps you just slow down a little bit. Perhaps you didn't really leave where you normally work, didn't leave your desk or your workstation, but you definitely stopped working on your current project, didn't you? You know, perhaps you just checked the internet, look at the news. Did you look at perhaps Facebook, Insta, Twitter, whatever? Perhaps the odd email popped up. Oh, it's a nice, easy one to answer, so I'll just quickly reply to that one, won't I? So, are you taking a break? And then you may also have thought, you know, do you know what? I think I'll get more done if I push on through here. I'm on a real roll. There's probably a deadline. There's always a deadline, isn't there? So I can't really afford 20 minutes, half an hour. I'm just going to crack on. So, and as well, don't forget, I went to the gym first thing, so I'm all right. I've done my exercise, haven't I? So just that's the setting. Where are you in terms of that? So this is the bit that isn't very cheerful. Some of the research tells us that the negative physiological consequences of not moving around too much. And again, this is probably common sense. Is it always common practice? Now, not taking breaks and not doing something meaningful in that break has been associated with, so this doesn't mean this is going to happen to you. I have to be really clear on that. It's associated with cheerless things like being obese, a metabolic syndrome, ovarian cancer, cardiovascular disease, musculoskeletal issues. So you'll know what it's like, your back, your shoulders, your neck. So there's a horrible collection of things that may happen to us if we don't move around much, and breaks can contribute to mitigating that. And there are also some links to psychological consequences. It is not taking breaks is linked to increased anxiety, increased depression, lower levels of well-being, etc. So it can be a fairly cheerless subject, but I think it's one of the things we can do in a workplace setting. We can do something about this. I'll just share another bit of research. I wish I'd done this research, but it kind of blew me away because it had a real personal resonance with me. At one of the places I worked at a few years ago, it's in the big city near where I live, Stoke-on-Trent, so sort of the top of the Midlands in England. And I started to cycle to work, and it took me about an hour each way. And I was one of those smug people that would come into work. You know, I'd done my exercise, I was kind of all shiny and done it, and I just felt great. And I'd cycle home at night. So I was getting like 2 hours of exercise in, and kind of, it was like free exercise on my bike, and I was sort of not worrying about a commute in my car. But then the research I found was that the harmful effects of too much sitting remain with us, even if we do the recommended levels of physical activity before work. So it won't counteract the negative physiological impact if the rest of a day. So I was doing this brilliant hours exercise and then for the day. So their conclusion, these researchers, was just you've got to keep doing the other things that we know we should be doing, getting up every now and then, standing, stretching, moving around, taking our lunch break. So if you do take breaks, there are benefits. Hopefully it counteracts the physiological harm that we've talked about, but there's lots of evidence to show that just taking a break and going for a walk or doing yoga or just any exercises around resilience, all those things are linked to improved well-being, lower levels of anxiety, and it can actually counteract. I know many of us feel this kind of 3 o'clock slump that's kind of linked a little bit to our circadian rhythms as well. It really does help avoid that kind of hour in the sort of early to mid-afternoon where we just don't feel like we're getting anything done. So there are some lovely things to aim for. I will also just add in, and this is really important, it is actually the law. So to take breaks at work, I'm quite sad. I know quite a lot of every country in Europe's got different rules on breaks and the law. So I was just checking out in Ireland, and this is a quote from the government website. So there will be exceptions to this, and don't ask me any detailed questions, but this is the general rule. In general, you are entitled to a 15-minute break when you have worked for 4.5 hours. If you work more than 6 hours, which would be for most people in a typical working day, you're entitled to a 30-minute break, which can include the first 15-minute break. And this is my favorite bit. The duty to comply with the rules on breaks and rest periods is with the employer, not the employee. Employers need to communicate regularly with employees and ensure that employees are taking adequate breaks. So I love that. The law in Ireland is much more compassionate than it is in the UK, trust me. So so I think there's a compelling reason. There's also a legal reason. So what can you do? Hopefully I'm going to leave you with some suggestions about what you can do about taking breaks. But the thing is, I know lots of individuals want to take breaks, but there's something in a culture of a workplace that prevents us, you know, if other people aren't doing it. So there's no one simple answer. So as an individual, if you want to do something meaningful at lunchtime, which is being active, learning something new, taking notice of something different, and you can prompt yourself to do that. You can do, the email reminders, you can set an alarm, make sure you've got no meetings. But there you go. That's really easy for me to say, isn't it? Take note. Don't have any meetings, because who's the person that, if somebody sends a meeting request, how many of us click decline and put a reason? No, sorry, I'm doing some yoga. We just don't do it. Because there's kind of that culture of, okay, someone's asked for a meeting, I must go to the meeting. So as an individual, it's hard. So I think we need to wrap things around the individual, which is as a team. So as a team, make a commitment to each other. We're going to encourage and support each other to take breaks. So that means not setting up meetings at lunchtime. Perhaps if we're all working from different locations these days, send each other a text or some kind of Teams message. We're on a break now, aren't we? So then it's culturally acceptable. There's no peer pressure. She's taking a break, I'm not, I feel guilty, etc. Then as a boss, so we're back to leadership, be a role model. If you're a boss, take breaks and let people know that you're doing it. The moment you work on through, you're setting the tone. So again, I know it's so easy for me to say that, because you've probably, if you're a boss, you'll have a boss who's asked for a meeting at 12:15 or some random time. So, but unless an individual wants to do it, the team wraps around it and the boss supports it, it's going to be tough. And then as an organization, I think, firstly, it's the law, but then you can embed the policies and culture to really encourage it. So I think it's a combination of things. And I would say it's probably now, so as Anne was saying, it's a time of change. I think a time of change gives us an opportunity to reset. So let's just kind of challenge ourselves, perhaps to turn over a new leaf in terms of taking breaks. So I just think it's an opportunity to reset and rethink about what I think is an important subject. So there you go.
Very good. And actually we have a comment in the chat box that it was harder. They found it harder to take breaks working from home, and now it's easier in the office to kind of manage that, which is great as well. That just
I was just going to pick. That's a really interesting comment. I would love to have got the time or the opportunity to research this, but anecdotally, I've heard that a lot of people are saying if they're now part at home and part in the office, when they're going back to the office or the workplace, the production site, whatever it is, that they're finding it easier to take breaks because there's a routine, there's more of an establishment. And then there's this, some people or a lot of people are feeling a sense of guilt about being at home, and I must be working, I've got to be working.
Yeah.
So if they go on, do something like crazy, like have their lunch, and wash up, it's kind of like, well, I can't do that, I need to get back. So there's something about that. And I just think that's, again, this real sort of psychological construct going on, which I do think we can work at. But yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, and I think as well, when you're in the office and you end up in conversations, there's a natural flow of breaks. Whereas we have another comment that one of the challenging parts of returning to the office is the distraction and the lack of productivity. So I think some people might thrive more in that environment and others, working from home, which is interesting. Thanks for that. And Anne, have you any other tips about, self-care and, managing your way through all these changes in new routines?
Absolutely, yeah. You know what, like, self-care is one of those phrases, right, that is a kind of a buzz phrase, and it has been over the last however many years. And when we think about it, we think about the aesthetic of it, like, and I would always describe it, the aesthetic, as bubble baths and face masks. And while I love them, I'll be doing them in approximately a number of hours this evening, but it is only one part, and it is the kind of surface of it. The thing around self-care is that it's not always pretty and nice, but when we think about what we need, it's pertaining to us, okay? So maybe it is looking at healthy emotional boundaries in our lives. Maybe those boundaries will be connected to breaks, like Mike had talked about there, really putting these things in place that might cause a feeling of discomfort in the moment, you know, if we don't have experience of boundaries, or we have negative experience of boundaries, you know, we might be taught that they're harsh, they're cruel, they're not nice, you know, whatever that means. But it is something that we need to look at in those kind of deeper ways of self-care. And maybe self-care is being able to speak authentically. You know, obviously that is something that we have a part to play in, and that self-care piece is our part, but that there's more to that than us just saying what we need to say and saying what we want to say. There's that collaboration piece if we're looking at a workplace setting, you know, within that. So like even over the last couple of years, self-care for us will have changed over time. What do we need? Do we need rest? Do we need creative space? Do we need, let's say, kind of social gatherings? Social gatherings as well, it's subjective. So maybe my typical social gathering would, maybe you might think, geez, I wouldn't do that in a million years, but maybe I derive my joy and my pleasure from that. You know, so it's about looking at what we need ourselves, knowing that that will change over time, and also giving ourselves permission to do it. Because there are certain things that, you know, like, let's say, like Micah talked about the importance of breaks, and maybe culturally in certain spaces it is seen as a badge of honor, or it's seen as something that people kind of boast about. Oh, I didn't take a break for ages, you know. And like, I remember I went to college with somebody years ago who would talk about how she studied for 12 hours today, and I'd be kind of thinking, well, A, that's not possible, and B, why? That's not good. 19-year-old me could see that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is something whereby, okay, can I allow myself to care for myself? And it's not about will I or won't I, it's about, yes, I need to, because I know it's good for me. And also it has that ripple effect. It's good for others as well. So let's say, you know, like Mike talked about, like in leadership roles, being a role model and walking the walk as such, you know, to be able to do that wherever you find yourself in that working structure, to be able to say, it's actually, selfish is not a bad word. You know, Mike, you mentioned about being selfish, but it's a good thing. And actually not just a good thing, but it's necessary for us to do that, because there's no point in being a martyr. It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for anybody else. And for you to look at self-care in that deeper way. So not just those kind of surface level things. Like I say, they're great. I'll be doing them myself. But, you know, to look at, okay, do I need to spend more time with my family? Do I need to reconnect with people in my life? Do I need to, you know, link in with a mental health professional? Do I need to work on certain things? And just to note in that, like to develop a relationship with a psychotherapist or any mental health professional, you don't need to be in dire straits to do that. It's important for us to look after ourselves psychologically and emotionally. So maybe that could be an example of self-care. You know, I would work with people, let's say, that, you know, they've heard loads of different things from people. What are you doing that for? What's wrong with you? Lord, it would turn your stomach. But, you know, it's a different thing now, and we have to look at it differently. Looking after ourselves in that mental health area, in that kind of emotional area, you know, it can be the same as looking after ourselves physically. Going to the gym, going for a swim, going for a walk, whatever it is. Those are all really kind of bona fide forms of self-care. Also, what I would say is, when we think of looking after our health is holistic, first of all. You know, we have to look at all aspects of it, but don't use looking after your health and by proxy of that, self-care, or naming it self-care. Don't use it as a stick to beat yourself with. So don't say, okay, hashtag self-care, I'm just going to run 10K and I haven't run in 5 years, or whatever it is, or I need to push myself or else it doesn't count, or else I'm going to berate myself over it. We need to go back to one of Mike's C words, compassion, and have that for ourselves. And maybe have a look at that if we are providing compassion for other people and we're not giving ourselves an ounce of it. You know, if there is that imbalance there, it's good for us to look at it with a mind of a gentle encouragement of ourselves, not to, again, use it to berate ourselves, but just to look and say, okay, why is there an imbalance there? When I think about caring for others, telling people you need to mind yourself, you need to look after yourself, giving that compassion, whereas with ourselves, we might think, well, I don't deserve it. You know, the rules don't apply to me in this situation. So it's that kind of balance, I suppose you could call it, you know. Yeah.
It's interesting, Anne, what you say about that deeper level of self-care as well, not just the bubble baths and getting my nails painted and you're like, oh, I'm all right for that, but that deeper level, emotional, giving yourself that time and space and awareness and honesty and that inner compassion as well, which can be difficult for people in Ireland and the UK as well. It doesn't come naturally.
Or sure, it'll be grand is kind of the the phrase there. But around that as well, like I know I'd mentioned about things, let's say like boundaries, if they are new to us, maybe providing a sense or a feeling of discomfort in the moment, but we have to look bigger picture with these things. If there is something that is new to us, if we're changing any aspect of our lives, while also going through that collective change as well, it's good for us to say, okay, well, does this serve me well? Does this benefit me? And am I kind of trying to, let's say, keep the peace or just solve it or comfort myself in the moment? Whereas if I make some changes that might be a little bit uncomfortable, is this going to benefit me long term? Because we have to think of that consistency piece as well and looking after ourselves long term, you know, because there will always be change. It's coming down the road whether we like it or not. And there's been an influx of it in the last while, but it's good for us to be able to have that kind of anchor point, I suppose, to say, okay, whatever happens, I don't know what's going to happen, but whatever does happen, I will make sure to look after myself in the appropriate way that I need to do now. And that's going to be different each time, but that's fine, you know.
Just to say to the audience today, if you want to pop in any questions you'd like to ask the panel, just what we were saying there, Anne, about that's kind of how you fill your tank to deal with, you know, surprises and changes, is just filling your tank, prioritizing yourself. As you said, Mike, you know, putting on your seatbelt first, or what was it, when you're flying analogy there as well. And it was interesting what you said, you know, it's great having the 4 C's. I think we have the 6 C's now after today's chat.
I think there's about 24 now.
We'll publish a book.
We've definitely invented a new model today.
Yeah. But it's a great tool for leadership, and it's simplistic, and it's kind of makes business sense as well, to kind of encapsulate what's really showing in the research about how to really engage people. And I think now, after the pandemic, having real, honest, authentic engagements as well at work, and that psychological safety and being yourself at work as well. So it's been a great discussion. I think so far I don't see any questions coming in. We must have covered everything.
We're so thorough. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's it. Well, just to say anyway, thanks for joining today. I think it was a great discussion. It was very interesting, and I learned, as always, some new things as well myself. And just to say to everyone today, happy Workplace Wellbeing Day. I think it's the 9th annual one in Ireland this year as well. And happy Bank Holiday weekend, which is great for well-being, I think, all around. All right, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to the audience as well for joining us today.
Cheers.
Thank you very much, everyone.